10 minutes. That's what I gave myself, standing at the near end of my own bridge with a 40-pound length of chain over my shoulder and a padlock in my fist, watching the second hand crawl around my grandfather's watch while 62 houses slept behind me, uphill, on the far side of the creek. In 10 minutes, the only way in or out of Whitestone Creek was going to belong to me. And the funny part, the part I kept turning over while I waited, was that it had always belonged to me. They just never read the deed. My name is Owen Mercer. I was 47 that year, and before I ran an earthworks outfit, I spent 12 years as a combat engineer, which is a long way of saying I build bridges, I read load ratings, and I do not panic when somebody makes noise at me. So let me back up, because the chain is the end of the story, and the story starts with a laminated sign and the number 85. It went up on my gate on a Tuesday, a little sign zip-tied to the post at the mouth of my road. Whitestone Creek Crossing Permit, $85, payable to the HOA. My road. The old Mercer tract runs a quarter-mile of gravel from the county highway across a single-lane bridge over Whitestone Creek, and it is the only land access to the subdivision that a developer stapled onto the back of my family's property 20 years ago. My grandfather graded that road. My father regraveled it. I've rebuilt the bridge deck twice with my own steel. There is no recorded easement giving the association 1 inch of it, a fact I could prove because reading every page before I touch anything is not a habit in my family, it's a sacrament. I pulled the deed and the county GIS the same afternoon, and the parcel lines were exactly where I knew they'd be. The road and the bridge sit on me. So I didn't tear the sign down. I photographed it, and I stood there while the board president rolled up in her SUV to enjoy the moment. Karen Voss was 55 and had built her entire self-image out of being the woman who keeps Whitestone Creek orderly. And she leaned out her window and told me, smiling, "Pay the crossing fee or find another way home, Mr. Mercer." Which was a genuinely funny thing to say to a man whose road is the only way home for everyone, including her. So I told her I'd take it under advisement. What I did instead was go home and open the Mercer Road Journal, a fat accordion folder my father started 30 years ago, every receipt for grading, gravel, culvert pipe, and bridge steel, and I added it to the deed and the survey. Then I mounted a camera on the bridge truss, the kind I use to watch for flood debris and overloading, and I mailed Karen Voss a certified cease and desist, informing the association that it had no easement, no ownership, and no authority to toll a private crossing. Her answer came 4 days later on association letterhead, a resolution declaring my road community infrastructure and threatening a lien if I obstructed resident access. They had decided that saying a thing in a meeting made it true. I have found that people who believe that are the easiest people in the world to beat, because they stop checking whether they're right. I raise the stakes the only way I know how, which is legally and with a torque wrench. I restored my own lock on the gate, and I did the one thing a combat engineer can't help doing to a single-lane bridge. I posted it. I bolted an official load rating placard to the truss, a hard weight limit, 8 tons, calculated honest, with the private road signage under it, because my bridge is my bridge, and I know what it'll carry. I filed a notice with the county and started the paperwork on an injunction. That's when the association stopped pretending this was about rules. One night, my bridge camera recorded a flatbed from a towing outfit rolling up with 2 men who cut my lock with bolt cutters and set the association's own barrier arm across my road. And standing beside them, on my land, was a pair of what Karen had started calling HOA patrol, hired security in reflective vests she was paying for out of the very budget she'd raised to improve the entrance she didn't own. The camera got all of it. I want to be clear that I could have driven down there at midnight. I didn't. I went in daylight, on my own property, and that decision is the whole reason I'm telling this from my kitchen, and not a deposition. The daylight visit is where it turned physical, and I've thought about how to tell this honestly, because the internet loves a man who swings first, and I am not that man. I drove my skid steer down to pull their barrier arm off my road, which I had every right to do, and the 2 security guards were waiting, and a third man from the tow outfit was already hooking a chain to my equipment trailer to haul it off. I told them, calm, that they were trespassing and that the barrier was coming off. The bigger guard put his hand flat on my chest and shoved me back toward the creek, and the second one grabbed my arm to spin me, and that, a stranger's hands on me, on my own bridge, to keep me off my own road, is the exact line the law lets you defend. I did not throw the first punch. I removed the hand that was on my chest, and when the big one cocked back to swing, I stepped inside it, the way you learn to when your job is being calm while things blow up. And I put him down on the deck with his own momentum, and I took the second man's wrist off my arm hard enough that he sat down to think about it. The tow operator decided very suddenly that his trailer chain needed his full attention somewhere far away. It lasted maybe 15 seconds. Nobody needed a hospital, and every frame of it lived on the truss camera. 2 men Karen Voss hired laid hands on a landowner first, on his own bridge, to enforce a toll that didn't exist. I helped the big guard up, told him he was working for a fraud, and pulled their barrier off my road with the skid steer while they retreated up the hill. Then I called the sheriff and reported the trespass and the assault myself, before they could invent a version where I was the animal. That should have slowed them down. Instead, the association went for the throat. And here is where it stopped being a squabble and became the thing that ended careers. I finally hung the chain, a real one, heavy, across the bridge, but I'm an engineer, so I hung it with a quick-release clevis and a reflective sign that read, "Emergency Access, Release Clevis," in letters you could read from a moving car. 62 houses lost their casual way in and out, and the fury came down the hill in petitions and screaming, and Karen's HOA patrol parked at my gate photographing my truck. Karen herself stood at the chain for a camera phone crowd and announced, loud, "That bridge belongs to the community whether he likes it or not," which I want you to hold on to, because she did too, on video. And then, 3 nights later, I heard a siren, and I watched an ambulance come up my road and stop at my chain. And I watched a man I recognized from the board already filming me from the shoulder before the ambulance had even fully stopped, narrating that Owen Mercer was blocking emergency medical access. It was, I'll admit, a genuinely good trap. It just happened to be built by people who forgot I had a camera and a working brain. Because here is what the recordings showed when the sheriff and I laid them side by side. My chain had a quick-release clevis and a lit sign, and the ambulance crew popped it in under 20 seconds. The truss camera time-stamped the whole thing. The actual jam that night wasn't my chain at all. It was the association's own barrier arm, which they had reinstalled 50 feet up the road and which had no release, forcing the ambulance to stop twice. And when I pulled the county EMS dispatch log through an open records request, the call wasn't an emergency at all. It was a routine, scheduled medical transport that someone had phoned in with emergency language to manufacture a scene, and the dispatch code proved it. So the story flipped inside a week. It was never, Owen Mercer nearly killed a patient. It was, the Whitestone Creek Board staged a medical emergency to frame the man whose road they were trying to steal. I handed the sheriff the footage, the EMS log, and the load rating file showing their 8-ton tow truck had already cracked my bridge deck weeks earlier, hauling their own barrier equipment, which meant, on top of everything, they damaged the very structure they were claiming was theirs. The case against me evaporated before it was ever filed, and in the corner of the transfer minutes they'd attached to their community infrastructure resolution, I finally saw the loose thread I'd been looking for, and I pulled it. The Mercer Road Journal did the first killing, quietly, the way paperwork does. 30 years of receipts, every grading pass and load of gravel and length of bridge steel paid for by one family and recorded at the county, made the association's whole theory that the road had somehow become common through decades of shared use, collapse. Because you cannot claim a prescriptive right to a road that one man has openly, exclusively, and provably maintained the entire time. But the open records request is what turned a property fight into a criminal one. The minutes the board had used to transfer my road to the community were dated 18 months back, and they were signed by 2 board members, and one of those members had sold his house and moved to another state 4 months before the meeting those minutes claimed to record. The document was a forgery. Somebody had manufactured a board vote that never happened, and backdated it to paper over the fact that they'd been tolling land they had no right to. I won my preliminary injunction on the deed and the journal alone, the judge ordering the association to keep its hands off my crossing while the case proceeded. But I didn't stop at the injunction, because injunctions are quiet, and these people had been loud, and a debt this public gets paid in the open. They tested the order almost immediately, which told me exactly how much they respected a judge. 2 days after the ruling, Karen's HOA patrol was back at my gate, and Greg Tully, the Meridian coordinator who'd been steering the whole thing by phone, showed up in person with a man he introduced as a surveyor and announced they were going to assess the community road while the case was pending. I stood in the middle of my own gravel and told them, on camera, that entering to survey my parcel in defiance of a preliminary injunction was contempt, and that I would be delivering the footage to the same judge who just ruled against them. Tully told me I was making a mistake, in the tone men like Tully use when they've never been told no by someone who meant it. And I told him to have his lawyer explain the word contempt to him on the drive back to the office. They left. I filed the footage anyway, because a paper trail is a paper trail. In that same week, a resident named Frank Delgado, a retired machinist who'd lived in Whitestone Creek since it was built and who was sick to the teeth of Karen's special assessments, knocked on my door with a manila envelope. Inside was the association's own budget packet, the line item where Karen had pushed through $41,000 for entrance improvements and access control, and the ballot where she'd sold it to the members as protecting community property. It was, in black and white, $41,000 of homeowner money spent building gates and hiring guards on land that a court had just confirmed was mine. Frank said, "Bury them," and handed me the last brick I needed. It was the secretary who finished it. Linda Hale had kept the Whitestone Creek minutes for 6 years, and when word reached her that a forged document was headed for the county district attorney with her signature block on it, she found me in the hardware store parking lot and asked to talk somewhere the board couldn't see. In my truck, she told me the whole architecture of it, that Karen Voss and the board's attorney, Paul Drake, had directed her to clean up the minutes to reflect the transfer, that Meridian HOA Services, the management company, had drafted the language and told everyone possession would win the day, and that she had known the moment she typed the absent member's name that she was committing a crime, and had done it anyway because she was afraid of Karen. I told her the one true thing I knew, which was that the person who comes forward is treated very differently from the person who gets caught, and I told her to bring everything to the district attorney before Karen could hand her the whole forgery to hold alone. She did. And before the reckoning meeting, I did one more thing on the record, because I wanted every neighbor and every prosecutor to see the door I'd held open. I offered the association, in writing, a clean and lawful way out, a fair market recorded easement, or let the county take the road into public maintenance, either one, and this ends. Karen Voss refused it in an email I would later watch a prosecutor read out loud, calling my offer extortion over community property. She chose the forgery over the deal. On the record. In writing. That email is the difference between a woman with a bad problem and a woman with an indictment. The public part happened fast after that, the way these things do once the paper turns. At the county's inquiry, Karen sat there and insisted, to the last, that the road was the community's, and always had been, playing her own recorded voice back to a room that had stopped believing her. That bridge belongs to the community, whether he likes it or not. Right next to the forged minutes, the staged EMS log, and the video of 2 men she'd hired putting their hands on me first. The district attorney opened a document fraud case against Karen Voss and Paul Drake personally. A resignation does not close a forgery file, and both of them learned that in a hurry. The board was recalled at a meeting so full people stood in the parking lot. Meridian HOA Services, staring down its role in drafting the language, terminated its contract with Whitestone Creek and paid a quiet settlement to get out before discovery made it loud. And here is the part that took the toll off the table forever. By agreement, with me, the county accepted the Mercer Road and Bridge into public maintenance, paid me fair compensation for the crossing and the deck their tow truck cracked, and recorded a public right-of-way on terms I wrote, and they read very, very slowly. The road that Karen Voss tried to sell back to me for $85 a car is a county road now, free for every one of those 62 houses to cross, and not 1 cent of it runs through her ever again. I took the chain down myself the morning the agreement recorded. I kept the padlock on a nail by the door. $85, it turned out, was a very expensive number for everyone except me. A word from me, not from Owen. What's worth studying isn't that the board lost, it's how they chose to, one avoidable step at a time. Karen Voss made one category error. She treated a board vote as if it could create a property right. An HOA's authority is borrowed. It regulates only what its recorded documents allow, and it can no more vote itself an easement than a book club can vote itself your car. She'd lost on the law the day she started. Nobody ever just made her produce the instrument. A board that truly owns something leads with the recording, not a laminated sign. Her real failure wasn't greed, it was reflex. She met every correction with escalation instead of retreat. A missing easement is survivable. It's a negotiation. Forging the minutes to cover it changed the venue, and that's the move that killed her. A civil fight rewards the deeper budget and the longer patience, the HOA's edge. But a forgery flips that, handing the case to a prosecutor, where one impossible signature is fatal and money buys no delay. 2 principles. Know the difference between authority and ownership, and make anyone claiming ownership show paper. And put your reasonable offer in writing, not to be gracious, but because it reframes you from the man with the chain into the party they refused. The honest question is the fight. Owen took the first shove and stayed legally in the right, but he chose to drive down and pull that barrier himself. Justice, or an escalation that got lucky? Tell me where you land.